Today, we're talking about something that has genuinely taken over the supplement shelves, coffee blends, and our social media feeds, and that's lion's mane mushroom. So, today we're going to cover what lion's mane actually is, the compounds that make it scientifically interesting, what the current research shows, and real concerns that you should know about before you run to your nearest grocery store.
Yeah, so we're not here to tell you lion's mane is a scam. We're just going to give you the full picture so that you can make the decision for yourself.
So, let's get into it. Welcome to Bite of Mind, the podcast where we dig into the real relationship between nutrition and mental health without all of that wellness fluff. So, we are two registered dietitians. I am Rachel Robinson, and I'm joined by my co host.
Okay, Bashesky.
So, let's get into it. Before we jump right into lion's mane itself, I did want to kind of step back and take a few minutes to define two terms that get thrown around constantly in the supplement space. And you've probably seen them if you've ever gone to
Mhm.
buy a lion's mane supplement. So, these are the words adaptogen and nootropic. And lion's mane gets marketed as both of these pretty often. So I think understanding what both of these words actually mean and where they come from is going to help us to evaluate the claims that we're going to see in this episode a little bit more critically.
Yeah, I agree. I realized it especially when I was doing the research, like getting ready for this episode. You know how your cookies work? So I got a lot of like mushroom product
Did you?
recommendations. Yeah. I saw that there are like mini product under these names, like they were saying adaptogens. I've heard that a lot. And many health benefits are listed, from helping you with your digestion to your face being puffy, losing the, fat from your face, I guess. I'm assuming that's what they were referring to. But all in all, it looks like a magical cure. And, you know me, I do not believe in magic. So I'm glad that we're getting to the bottom of this.
Let's start with the term adaptogen. So, the word
Yeah.
adaptogen was first proposed in the 1940s by a Soviet scientist named, I'm going to butcher this name, I'm so sorry,
Lazarev.
Lazarev. Oh, there you go. You got it.
Lazarev. I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. If I'm wrong, you can judge me all you want. I'm just
Now,
telling
that's
all of our audience.
way more accurate than what my English butt would have said. So, I'm sure. But his original framing was that adaptogens were plant based substances that could non specifically enhance the human body. So that means that they weren't targeted at any one specific disease or system, but instead were broadly supportive of the entire body. So he
Mhm.
described three criteria to qualify something as an adaptogen. So the first was that it had to help the body resist a wide range of adverse conditions. So physical,
Mhm.
chemical, and biological stressors. So again, it didn't target one specific thing, but was more broadly. Second, it had to maintain homeostasis, meaning that it had to offset physical disorders caused by external stress in the environment and work towards balance within the body. So helping the body maintain that homeostasis. And then thirdly, it had to cause no harm to the normal functions of the body. So it essentially had to be non toxic. So, like many things in research and science, terms do evolve over time. So, in the
Mhm.
1960s, a fourth criteria was added, which included having a positive or excitatory effect on the body and producing that effect without the side effects of traditional stimulants, meaning that it would cause a excitatory positive effect but have no negative side effects like insomnia or excessive energy drain.
So sounds like, over time, there were more researches and then this name or this term kept evolving, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and then, in the 1990s, we had that whole switch in the Food and Drug Administration and the FDA of America's FDA.
Mhm.
where it classified supplements as kind of separate from medications. And that was when it opened up, the average person to be able to go to their store and pharmacy to be able to buy over the counter dietary supplements. So in 1998,
Mhm.
the FDA then classified adaptogens as a subset of these dietary supplements, specifically a botanical dietary supplement. And the FDA at that time described adaptogens as being a kind of metabolic regulator that assisted in environmental adaptation and prevented any external harm. And so
Mhm.
I think the main thing I want to point out here, really quick, before we dive into the rest of the episode, is that adaptogenics are not recognized as pharmaceutical medications. They are
Mhm.
recognized as dietary supplements. So this means that they do not go through the same rigorous safety and efficacy testing that medications do. So, in order for a medication to be approved by the FDA, it has to go through multiple levels of research first, which include preclinical trials with mice, as well as then fully randomized controlled clinical trials with humans, because we want to be
Mhm.
able to indicate that that medication is doing what it says it's going to do. So, is it effective? That it's safe, that we know what the proper dosage is, and that we know all of the side effects and medication interactions that it could possibly have. Supplements,
Mhm.
on the other hand, don't have to go through any of this type of rigorous testing. And in fact, many supplements released onto the market do not have any human research at all. A lot of them will just get to that preclinical phase where they kind of show some benefits in animals and they're like, good enough, and they put it onto the shelves. And because of this, companies that like produce these dietary supplements cannot make the same claims that medication companies can. So they cannot claim that these botanicals or herbs have the ability to prevent, treat, or cure any specific diseases or illnesses.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, it is great that they can't do that, but at the same time, I feel like, in the market right now, the way they are marketed, we're kinda seeing it, that's kind of ho like, that is kind of how it's marketed right now, especially the
Hmm.
ones that I see, it says like, "Oh, it can prevent, like, bloating, it can prevent this." Kinda like almost treating or curing whatever thing that they're going through at that moment. But anyways, how about the nootropics? How does this differ from adaptogens?
Yeah, so the nootropics have a similar story. And I do want to point out to people this spelling of that word is so weird. Like, I always hear nootropic, and I expected it to be spelt like neuro, like how the brain is, like Neur, and
Mhm.
instead it's spelled Noo. Really weird,
Yeah,
but
and I
anyways.
wanna say tropic, not tropic. Like, why is this like that? It is so terrible.
Totally. But anyways, we can blame the Romanian psychologist who coined this term. So this word was
Yeah.
coined in 1972, 73-ish, around that time, by a Romanian
Mhm.
psychologist and chemist. And I'm going to completely butcher his name again, so I'm so sorry. But it's named, he was called Corneliu Gorgia? Gor- Georgia?
Gorgi.
I don't know. I'm so sorry. For anyone who is
You say
Romanian out there that can pronounce that, I am so sorry. Okay. He described nootropics, though, as a substance that enhanced the cognitive function, particularly memory and learning, especially in situations where those things were already impaired. But there is no uniform approach to categorizing these compounds at this time. So, I do want to point out, though, here is one common nootropic substance that many people probably recognize, and that is caffeine.
Well, I'm glad because 'cause I'm a coffee drinker, so it's good that it it has some benefits at least, with my cognitive
Yeah.
function and with my memory. You see, I think it's crazy how often we're seeing these terms are thrown around on supplement packaging with 0 explanations on them. As I was
Hmm.
mentioning before, I think it almost comes across as it's curing or preventing these kind of problems, right?
And I think that's what's interesting when we look at these supplement packaging, right? Like they'll say, oh, something's adaptogenic, something's nootropic.
Mhm.
And because we have definitions of these terms, people like automatically look at those and then think, oh, that must mean there's tons and tons of evidence that support
Mhm.
that this is a brain boosting supplement or this is a health promoting substance. And that's not always the case. When things are adaptogenic or nootropic, that's just kind of this roundabout marketing way that companies can say, oh, this could benefit us in these ways, but there's not really any like regulation around utilizing those terms in marketing. So, because it's a supplement, these companies can't say, oh, this is really great for helping with depression. Like they can't claim that it would help with that,
Mhm.
but they can say, oh, it's nootropic, right? So then
Yeah.
people kind of go, oh, that must
Or I
help my
guess
depression.
like you can maybe put some of the symptoms of depression, like, are you feeling constantly down, or are you feeling
Mm-hmm.
this, are you feeling that, and then this may help you, kind of thing. Because I see that a lot
Mm-hmm.
too. Like, instead of giving a particular condition, they like to give the symptoms that person might be, suffering, for that
Mm-hmm.
condition. But yeah, that's why I think, when we think about these sort of things, I know that we're going to get there in the end to give an idea and everything. But I think it's important to, like, when you hear these kind of claims, be like me. Be like, this sounds so magical. This sounds so good to be true. Let me just do a little bit more digging. And, the stuff that we're finding is very interesting about these. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of good things that mushrooms can do, but at the same time, some of them are like very limited too. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and well, I mean, that's a great segue kind of into what we want to talk about because when we can understand like what these terms mean, we can take a second to look past the label and ask, okay, but what does the research actually say about this
mhm.
product? They're claiming it's nootropic, but what does that actually mean? And that's the question
Yeah.
that really matters, and that's what we're looking at today. But before we do that, you kind of teased it a little bit. I wanted to jump in and kind of give everybody a background of what lion's mane actually is, because some people might not know when they just see lion's
Mhm.
mane on a supplement that it is a mushroom, like you were saying. So
Yay.
I want to kind of jump in and give just a little bit of a background on it.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. So I'm going to completely butcher this name because I'm horrible at pronouncing things. So the botanical name for lion's mane is Hericium erinaceus. I think that's how you say it. But it's just an edible
Mhm.
and a medicinal mushroom that actually has been used for centuries in traditional Chinese medicine. In Chinese medicine, it is called ho to gu. And I did look that up, so I'm pretty sure that was pronounced correctly. But, anyways, it is a mushroom that doesn't look like your traditional mushroom. So it doesn't have like a stem and a cap on it like you would see in the grocery store if you went to go buy some portobellos. It actually looks really unusual, and I showed you some pictures the other day. It
Yeah.
is really white and shaggy, and it grows in long cascading spines like a lion's mane or a cascading waterfall of teeth. I personally think it looks like an old man's beard.
Yes, it does. That's what she said to me. I looked at it and I approve it. 100% looks like an old man's beard.
Yeah. And I don't know, Ilkay, if you've seen in the grocery stores where you are, but I've seen them in a couple grocery stores here and there because they're very much used as culinary use as well. So these mushrooms are very tasty, and sometimes you can find them in your produce section, especially if you're more at one of those artisanal places or more co-op or like a Sprouts or Fresh Time
Yeah.
type place. I don't know if you've
Um,
seen them
I
around.
I have not, like, I'll be straightforward and honest. So before our episodes, we go through these things, and then, Rachel was mentioning about how it's also used, like, in the culinary, and I was like, "What? People cook those things and then add them to their like, they actually make food with it?" I mean, I thought it was just
Yeah.
more like, a drink that you could make because I myself purchased the coffee, so wanted to see, how adaptogens actually work. Um but yeah, it was so surprising for me to see that they're actually using this for like, in the food, like actual
Mhm.
food. They're cooking with it.
Yeah, and for anyone who is curious, lion's mane has a slightly seafood like flavor to it. So it doesn't taste like normal mushrooms. So we actually, my husband and I like to forage for mushrooms. And back when we lived in Wisconsin, we actually used to forage for lion's mane. So whenever we found it, we were always like, yes, because it makes the best vegan crab cakes that taste just like crab. And I'm not exaggerating at all about that. It is very, very, very tasty. But like you mentioned, you can find it in so many other ways in the grocery store: coffees, teas, gummies, pills, dried
Yeah.
powders, fresh. How is that coffee taste, by the way, that you got?
I didn't get the regular one. I'm sure that I would hate it if I get the regular one. I got those like instant. I think they're all instant, to my
Mm,
understanding. But I guess this one was like latte supposedly.
okay.
Mm, It didn't taste so great as a coffee,
Yeah.
because I'm a coffee lover, you know that, and I was like, "I'm
Mhm.
gonna give it a try." I tried a couple times. I don't know, I guess it was okay, but I didn't really feel, like, so different caffeine-wise. I think if you are someone who drinks coffee, because I did, like, I drink coffee every single day. So if you're someone that drinks coffee regularly, then, it does a trick for one day. You can just switch it, but, I'll be honest, I didn't really look at all the ingredients, so it might have some sugar in them too. So
Yeah, I've never tried the coffee ones, but I have tried a like adaptogenic matcha that had lion's mane and
Mhm.
stuff in it too. Not a
Oh,
fan. I did not think it tasted good at all. Which I mean, it is kind of hard because when you're going after like drinking coffee or teas, you're wanting the flavor of that coffee or tea, and I feel like mushrooms overpower the flavor of those a lot. But I don't
yeah.
know. I haven't tried very many brands. I'm sure some might be better than others. But yeah, I mean, kind of like I mentioned a little bit earlier too, lion's mane has been used for many, many years in traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic type medicine. And I do want to point out that the gap between kind of that traditional use, which definitely may have like uses and be beneficial in those capacities, but what the difference between that use and what supplement companies now are promising that lion's mane could do for you is a very big jump and big gap where they're putting very, very high doses on things and claiming very aggressive, this can cure lots of things, right? And so I want to
Yes.
kind of jump into the science a little bit with lion's mane. And I don't want to overwhelm people with some of these
I
terms.
don't, but here's the thing though, like, I really wanna touch base with this part because one of the things that is, like, thrown around a lot lately is cortisol, which is true, like, it's our stress hormone, and there are actually claims with these coffees, like, just like you say, that they can actually help you with your, like, stress level, it can reduce your stress level, and that's all it's about, right? Like, it's reducing your stress
Hmm.
level, and then so that your health is becoming like, you're becoming very, very healthy, you can drop weights and whatnot. So, that's
Hmm.
why I think it's important to see, like, does that really do that? And how does it do that if it does, you know? Like, let's just,
Yeah.
look at some of the mechanisms.
Yeah, let's do that. So, the science behind lion's mane, they're kind of looking at two main primary bioactive components of lion's
Mhm.
mane. So, there's thought that I'm going to always butcher these names. Hericenones, I
Welcome to
think is
my
how you say
world,
it.
Rachel.
I know. The hericenones, I believe is how you say it, but that's a compound found in the fruiting body. And so some of the
Mhm.
research is involving looking at this specific compound, which stimulates or is thought to stimulate nerve growth factor in the brain.
Mhm.
Nerve growth factor is a neuroprotein that's essential for the growth, maintenance, and survival of neurons, particularly in the brain areas that are linked to memory and to mood. The
Mhm.
second primary bioactive compound that they're looking at is arenaceans, which are found in that mycelium. So that's that root structure of mushrooms.
Mhm.
And that's thought to stimulate NGF as well, so the nerve growth factor, but as well as brain derived neurotrophic factor, which is called BDNF. These are
Mhm.
considered more potent at crossing the blood brain barrier than the hericenones. So
Mhm.
the kind of mycelium portion of lion's mane is what is commonly used more in the research than just the fruiting body itself. So
Okay.
I wanted to point that out very briefly because a lot of times when we see mushroom supplements, you'll see online people will say, don't
Mhm.
buy any mushroom supplement that's made with mycelium because that's cheaper and less bioactive, which is true for some other mushrooms, which we're not going to get in today. But I want to point out that with lion's mane, it's actually the opposite. So a lot of the research is showing that the mycelium might be the more bioactive component of lion's mane than the fruiting like body, the actual mushroom itself.
Yeah, but both of the compounds are like it looks like they are both, stimulating,
Mhm.
nerve growth factor in the end. That's
Mhm.
promising, like, stimulating the nerve growth factor, and,
Mhm.
like, if I'm wrong, please correct me, but this is, like, directly related to kinda, like, having new thought pathways, and then so that you can, start being able to cope with stress a little bit better as you can develop new, like, n n growth in your nerves, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the protein that is essential for growth and maintenance of the neurons. And those neurons are the
Mhm.
things in the brain that make the connections, when you're learning and are recalling memory and all that stuff. And the neuron health is affected by things like stress and aging. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, the neurogrowth factor, if it's boosting that, that means that it could potentially be helping offset the effects of stress or aging or disease states like depression. So there's that. And then the BDNF, which I kind of want to hone in on a little bit more because the studies that we found, they discuss BDNF more than they do the NGF. And so
Mhm.
the BDNF, again, is brain derived neurotrophic factor, kind of sometimes thought of as like miracle grow for the brain, which is an
Mhm.
oversimplification. But basically, BDNF is involved in neuroplasticity, which we talked about in one of our previous episodes. That's just the brain's ability to adapt, form new connections, and recover from stress.
Okay, so when I was talking about, like, those pathways being built, I think that's more like brain-derived neurotrophic factor than the other one, right?
They're both related to it. They both
Uh-huh.
are just slightly different pathways, but they both help
Okay.
to combat the effects of neurons by stress. The main caveat I think that is most important just to get from here is that these mechanisms right now, a lot of the research into the mechanisms are primarily done with like animal models, so preclinical stuff, as well as
Mhm.
in vitro, so cell cultures, like in petri dishes.
Mhm.
And that means that like those mechanisms could be are being observed in these studies, but that doesn't automatically then mean it's clinically effective in people. And when you see the term like clinically studied ingredients on a supplement,
Mhm.
that often just means it's been studied in some context. That doesn't mean that it was automatically studied in humans. And it also doesn't mean that we have studies on the specific dose that's in those supplements
Mhm.
either, or that that specific outcome is proven. So that's just something to be aware of, that there's different types of research. And that's what we kind of want to get into with these couple studies that we found today.
To see, like, there's always a human factor. There's always gonna be a human factor. There's always gonna be a real life
Hmm.
factor. So just because, if research is, working for, like, in vitro or on animal models doesn't mean that it's gonna work in like, because a lab is more of the sterile environment, but the real world really isn't. So let's get
Hmm.
into the research then.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to prevent this next section from being a little too textbook or academic. So, what I'm kind of
Okay.
going to propose here for you and for our audience here is that I
Okay.
want you to think of these as less of studies and more like three chapters of the same story. So, we're going to look at how each one of these chapters is looking at a slightly different question, and we're going to look
Mhm.
at together how they build a bigger picture. So, the first one that we're going to look at is going to be a preclinical mouse study. And then the other two we have are human trials.
So I should be taking notes then? Or should I be taking notes? What are you saying?
Yeah, no notes needed for this. But for our audience, if you are interested in reading the research for yourself, we will have that linked below in the show notes. But first, we're going to start with the question with the mouse study, or start with the question that the mouse study was trying to answer, because I think it helps reframe everything that comes after it. And so that
Mhm.
question is, if lion's mane has an antidepressant effect, how is it doing that? What's actually the mechanical work that's being done to cause that effect?
Which is the question that's never asked on our day-to-day life, yeah, and it's not on the supplement labels or anything.
Yeah, exactly, which was exactly what we were talking about before too. Like you'll see these
Mhm.
claims, but these are not the questions that we're asking. And that's what the study was looking to answer. So this study came out of the University of Hong Kong in 2021. It was done by Chong and his colleagues, or their colleagues,
Okay.
and it is a mouse study, like I said. So the researchers took mice. Specifically, when they're doing mice studies, they're genetically altered mice to not have a lot of confounding factors. So they're not just grabbing mice out in the woods. Like these are laboratory mice, just so everybody knows. But
Okay.
these mice were put through what's called a chronic restraint stress protocol, which sounds exactly as mean as it is. So it's 6 hours of physical immobilization of the mice. So they take the mice
Mhm.
and they prevent them from moving at all for 6 hours for 14 days straight. So that is unfortunately a pretty well validated way of being able to induce what we think of as anxiety and depressive like behavior in the mice. But I honestly, I don't know. It's hard to truly say what is actually anxiety and depression in
Mhm.
mice as we can't like read their minds, right? But they
Yeah.
do produce similar symptoms such as anhedonia, which is that loss of pleasure, which we do see in depression.
Okay. So how are they able to say that though?
When we look at anhedonia, they use, and in this study they used it, a test called the sucrose preference test. So this is
Mhm.
where they will provide mice with sugar water and regular water because rodents really like sweet things. And so
Mhm.
if they notice that they're preferring regular water more than the sugar water, that would indicate that they're probably losing that sense of pleasure and having anhedonia, which is that depressive like behavior. So that's an
Mhm.
example of how they will try to measure depression in mice.
Okay. So I'll just be honest, that sounds very, very lame. But just based on the sucrose, I mean, it is cool. I thought they were gonna do some blood test or something. And the very first thing that came into my mind, I'm like, what if they have diabetes? But
Yeah.
those are clinical mice. I know you said that. They
Yeah.
they are clinically grown. They're for that job. I'm sure they were getting their health check. So
Yes, yeah.
yeah.
And it's kind of funny because I always look at that with mice studies, right? Like we don't know how anxiety and depression actually are exhibited in mice. And so the different
Yeah.
studies, or not studies, but the different tests that they have to do to say, oh, this mouse is anxious or depressed is always so funny to me because we talked about this in one of our other episodes with like the open field test to measure anxiety, where they basically see how often the mice run into an open space to determine how anxious or how, brave they are. And it's funny to me with all these just different situations that we put mice in to measure these. So that's that's just one of the limitations, I guess, with
Yeah.
mice studies. But anyways,
You see it. This is good to talk about these sort of things, right? Like when you see a research with the mice, oh, I worked in mice and apparently, this product is being used like this. So you can actually start questioning some of the things.
yeah. Well, anyway, so back to the study. So,
Yes.
in the study, after they immobilized the mice and they had measurable anxiety and depressive like behaviors, which they measured through tests like the sucrose test, they then gave some of the mice lion's mane extract for 4 weeks. And then they ran them through a battery of other behavioral tests.
So then can we say the stressed mice, stressed ones, the ones that got to lion's mane, they did better then?
Yeah, so that's exactly what they saw. So they saw the mice that received the lion's mane had reduced anxiety and reduced depressive like behaviors. So on the
Mhm.
surface, it kind of looked pretty straightforward that lion's mane, yeah, helps reduce it. But what the study really wanted to ask was, why does that work? So what they did
Mhm.
to answer that question was that they gave a separate group of the mice who still underwent that stressed procedure of being
Mhm.
restrained. They gave them a drug called temozolomide, which blocks hippocampal neurogenesis. So, meaning that this drug specifically prevents the brain from being able to grow new neurons in the hippocampus.
Yeah, I think I have an idea why they did that, but can you tell us more? Why did they do that?
Yeah, so it's a direct test of the mechanism. So it's asking, is lion's mane working because it's promoting that neurogenesis, or
Mhm.
is there something else going on? So if you're blocking that neurogenesis from happening with this drug, and then that antidepressant effect disappears, then that would tell you that neurogenesis is likely the mechanism for why the lion's mane was working. But if they gave them the drug and the mice were still experiencing less depressive and anxiety symptoms or
Mhm.
behaviors, then the effect would probably be from something else and not neurogenesis.
Okay. So what happened?
Yeah, so when they gave him that drug to block the neurogenesis, the
Mhm.
antidepressant effects disappeared. So what that meant is that The neurogenesis was not just a side effect of taking the lion's mane. The neurogenesis was the reason that the lion's mane actually drove them to have an improved mood. So that anxiety and depressive
Oh.
behavior improvement was coming from the neurogenesis.
So it wasn't necessarily the whatever ingredient was like improving the amount of like serotonin or dopamine kind of a thing. It was more of like the side effect of neurogenesis actually.
Mhm.
That's what it was making you feel better. And then as soon as that
Yeah.
mechanism is blocked, lion's mane is not able to like support you through that.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And so that's the kind of experiment where you can knock out the proposed mechanism and watch the effect disappear that confirms that that is the mechanism that is working. So it is stronger than a casual claim that you can make in preclinical research, and it's stronger than just having that maybe correlational kind of effect or um, even causation effect of, oh, we gave them this, they had this benefit, because you're actually able to say, this is how it's working. This is the
Mhm.
specific mechanism. So it's directly tested and it's stronger than just saying, we gave them this, they had this benefit. It's like, we gave them this, they had this benefit, we blocked the mechanism,
Mechanism.
therefore didn't work. So we know that's the
Yeah.
mechanism.
So, like, you're pretty much, like, displaying the entire you see the entire pathway pretty much, like, how is that happening kind of a thing, which is, a very good thing to see, I think. But, for our audience and for a nice reminder for myself, but what is this neurogenesis exactly? And, why does it matter so much for depression? Because I've been mentioning about it, you've been mentioning about it, so let's just, figure that out too.
Mhm. That's a good point. We should probably stop and define that. So neurogenesis literally just means the birth of new neurons. And neurons are
Mhm,
just brain cells. So, the hippocampus, which is one of the brain regions that is very associated with memory and mood, one of the ones we also talked about in our very first episode on ADHD, it's one of the
mhm,
few areas in the adult brain where these things happen. So, we know that depression is associated with reduced neurogenesis in the hippocampus, and we
mhm.
know that like exercise helps improve it, and there are other things that could help improve it. And so this idea that like lion's mane is also promoting neurogenesis isn't really a wild claim to make, because there's lots of
Mhm.
things that can help boost that in our
Yeah.
brain.
Okay. Yeah, because like, it's kinda nice to know that the neurogenesis can also affect that too. Because when I think about depression, the very first thing that comes to my mind, I think serotonin or dopamine, how those kind of chemicals can affect your brain, and that's like the main thing that everybody talks about, right?
Mhm.
But when I
Yeah.
first about heard about this, I was doing a research back in college for, different kind of mushrooms. Shall remain nameless. So those kind of with those kind of mushrooms, I've seen that there was some neurogenesis or new pathways were happening.
Mhm.
But we earlier mentioned about BDNF. So where does that sit with all of this? Because I remember asking you like if it helps with more neurogenesis too. So
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's definitely where everything really does connect here in these studies. So
Mhm,
BDNF, so that brain-derived neurotropic factor, is one of the key proteins that help drive neurogenesis. We talked about that a little bit earlier with the mechanisms, that that is one of the areas that they're studying with lion's mane. It's essentially the
mhm,
signal that tells the hippocampus to grow and maintain the neurons. And in this study, lion's mane did elevate the BDNF expression in the hippocampus. So they measure this in the mice's brains. So they also noticed that some of the receptors, the BDNF receptors and downstream signaling proteins, were also
mhm.
affected as well. So like that whole pathway kind of lit up for them. And I want to flag that specifically because BDNF is going to show up again when we talk about the third study, which is going to kind of mean something because it's seen more in people.
So I'm filing that away, putting that into back burner. We'll bring it and then serve it to you again. Let's get back to the mouse study though. What I'm wondering is what are the limitations of this study? Because, at the end of the day, we're so different than mouse or mice.
Mhm.
So where do we stand with this?
Yeah. We absolutely cannot compare mice and humans, and that's something we will talk about when we get into the considerations for a lot of the research too. There's so many differences between us and
Mhm,
mice. So that is just something to point out right away there between mice and humans. But the other kind of two things I want to point out with this study as well is that the dosing of lion's mane to the mice in the study were actually done through injection. So they
mhm.
injected them directly into their abdomens, so it wasn't taken orally like we see as humans, like in on the shelves in the grocery stores. We're seeing pills, supplements, coffees, things that we're ingesting through our mouth. So that
Mhm,
absorption profile is going to be very different already with that. And then on top of that, the way they dosed the mice was by giving them milligrams of lion's mane per kilogram of body weight. And so that doesn't necessarily translate cleanly to a human dose. Like, we don't know, does that mean humans need the same milligram per kilogram of body weight dose, or is our dose going to be very different? Again, taking it
mhm.
orally versus injecting are going to be different as well. So basically, this study just gives us a credible mechanistic story and a proof of concept. So it tells us that neurogenesis is probably the hypothesis or mode of action, but it cannot
Mhm.
tell us whether you'll get the same effect from an oral lion's mane capsule or if this would even work in humans.
Yeah, which means that now we need a little bit more human studies too, so that we can see how it looks like on human. So
Mhm.
what happens when when you give these supplements to human?
Exactly. And this is kind of chapter two. So that's exactly the next question that we want to ask. Does this actually have an effect in people? So,
Mhm,
this next study that we're looking at is a human trial. It is a proper double blind randomized placebo controlled pilot study, which is a
mhm.
pretty good methodology for a human study.
Yes, that's amazing, but you gotta just go through some of them. I mean, like double blind, randomized, placebo controlled. Like you gotta give us a little bit of like understanding of what these things are.
Yes, we can definitely give a breakdown of what each of those terms mean. So, pilot study, I'll start there, means that it's
Mhm,
designed to be an early test. So, it's a
mhm.
study that has enough participants to see if there is a signal worth chasing, but it is not usually large enough to draw any sort of definitive conclusion. So, think of it as like a feasibility study. So, it's asking, does anything show up in healthy people? And then if yes, maybe we need to go further and like do actual bigger trials with a lot more people.
Yeah.
Then the other word is placebo controlled. And that means that they use lion's mane in this case and a placebo, which is usually a sugar pill. And then they randomize who is going to be receiving the lion's mane versus the sugar pill. And placebos are important because we're able to help get rid of the bias of like knowing you're receiving a substance, because we know placebo bias like that can is a real thing that we can measure when we
And
know we're
sometimes I
receiving
love it.
something. Yeah,
I
and
use it
sometimes
to
you love it.
myself, Rachel. Sometimes I do something and I'm like, "I'm gonna be good with this," and I'm like, in the worst case scenario, it's placebo and it's gonna still help me.
Yeah, exactly. So when we know that we're getting something, we can often manifest improvements and symptoms in our body. Our brain is a very powerful organ. So
Yeah.
when we can do placebo controlled studies that basically determine who's getting a placebo and who's getting the supplement, we can make it easier or make it, I guess, harder for the participants to know which one they're getting to help
Mhm.
control for that bias, right? And then that's what
Yeah.
the randomization word comes in. And then double blind adds another layer onto that. It means that the participants didn't know whether they were receiving that sugar pill or the lion's mane themselves. And it also means that the researchers who were giving them the pills also didn't know which pills were what. So it added that second layer of bias control.
Very, very secretive. I love it. I love it so much that, it requires this many process kind of a thing. So I don't know, you don't know.
Yep. And that's what I love about research is that there's so many fun different ways that we can go about administering things to control for different variables. So this was a 2023 study done by Dushardy and colleagues. I may have butchered that name, so I'm very sorry. They included 43 healthy volunteers. The ages were
Okay.
between 18 and 45, but the mean age was 26. They had no chronic diseases, so no psychiatric illnesses, completely healthy individuals. Half of the group was randomized to receive lion's mane at 1.8 grams per day, which was split into three 600 milligram doses. And then the other half got those placebo sugar pill capsules. And they each took these capsules for 28 days total.
Okay, so the very first question that comes to my mind is why healthy participants or volunteers? Why aren't we choosing the ones with actually have those problems? Like, if we're trying to understand Lion's main stand in the mental health, then shouldn't we be testing on like people with depression, anxiety, or any other mental health condition?
Yeah, that's a really good instinct to have because you are very correct there that that is a significant limitation to these studies or to this specific study and pilot studies in general. And we're going to come back to that. But there's a reason that researchers often start with a healthy population group. So you want to know first whether there's any signal at all that this could potentially work before you just start making claims about clinical populations or dive into adding more variables, such as a mental
Mhm.
health condition. Because if nothing's showing up in the healthy people under controlled conditions, then that could be a very important finding in and of itself. So that's kind of why they'll start here and they build upon it.
Okay, that's fair. So, what showed up?
So, two things showed up in this study. The first one, which was kind of a little surprising, but they essentially gave people doses and then after the first day, they did a bunch of cognitive tests. And then at the end of the 28 days, they gave them even more cognitive tests. And they found that after the first single dose of lion's mane, that the participants who received the lion's mane were significantly faster on something called the Stroop task.
So, what is Stroop task? I feel like that this is a foreign language.
Yeah. So this is a classic cognitive test where you're shown a word. So say the word says red, but it's written in blue ink. And you have to say the color of the ink, not the word instead. So what that
Mhm.
does, so it sounds simple, but it's actually kind of a difficult task to
Yes, it
do.
is really hard.
And so those errors they count as well in the scoring process. So what it's doing is
Mhm,
it's measuring speed and then your ability to suppress like competing cognitive like responses coming in. So are you able to
mhm,
suppress the word color that's coming in and be able to just say the color that it is visually appearing as? So it directly is measuring kind of attention and attention and executive function. So a faster
mhm.
performance on that task would be meaningful.
That sounds very interesting and exciting, and what I'm wondering is, did this happen, like, after how many dose?
Yeah, so that was just after one dose, which was
Mhm,
interesting because it could suggest that something really acute might be happening. So maybe not even just a slow neuroplasticity buildup over weeks, but maybe more acute, just similar to like how we take caffeine and then you'll
mhm,
have the benefits of caffeine right after taking it. But I do want to be clear because the authors themselves also were very clear about this that the improvement in this kind of executive function only showed up on the Stroop task. And they did a bunch of different cognitive battery tests to measure
mhm.
executive function, not just the Stroop task. And this improvement was not seen on those other tasks. It was only seen on the Stroop. So that means it wasn't replicated across the other tests. So we can't really say that was a definitive finding. It's maybe just like a signal that maybe that would be worth exploring
Mhm.
further in the future with like larger sample sizes. But it was just still an interesting thing that they pointed out in the study.
Yeah, it sounds like it needs to be tested a little bit because, like,
Mhm.
there's the long-term effects that we need to see. I mean, like, it still is good if it's even acting like coffee because I think coffee was a groundbreaking thing that we found as human beings, with the
Yeah.
impacts and everything. But
Yeah.
yeah, so, it feels like it still needs some more testing with the long-term effects and then the other tasks that we can
Mhm.
perform with the longer
Yeah.
term use of it.
Yeah, exactly. You can't really just take a pilot study with 43 people and say, oh, this is definitely what's happening here. It needs to be
Mhm.
replicated with larger studies.
Okay. But what were their findings after 28, like full of the 28 days?
Yeah, so after the full 28 days, they did find a trend towards a reduced subjective stress in the people who received the Lions group compared to the people who received that sugar pill placebo compared to where they started on day one.
Okay, so what does trend mean for our audience?
Yeah, so trend means that the numbers moved in the right direction, but they didn't cross into the threshold where researchers could call it a statistically
Mhm.
significant result. So it's just a 28-day pilot with 43 people. So it's not really surprising that we didn't see a statistically significant result. It's such a small group. The
Mhm.
study may have just not had enough participants, or maybe they didn't do it for long enough to produce like a definitive result, but the trend does kind of tell you that maybe it's worth testing in a bigger study with a longer trial. It tells you that it may possibly be working, but we just don't have
Mhm.
definitive answers.
So it's just, something is showing up, but we can't conclude much yet. So there might be a light at the end of the tunnel with with these things.
Basically, yeah, that's the honest takeaway. It's a well-designed pilot that generated enough kind of answers to justify maybe a next larger study, and the design itself was definitely pretty good, and it's genuinely better than a lot of other studies that we see out there. So the limitation wasn't necessarily the design of the study, it was more that it was just a super small sample size, and it was done with completely healthy and young people that had no mood disorders, which does bring us back to the question that you did ask a few minutes ago.
Yes. What happens in people who are actually struggling with mental health problems?
And so I'm going to give you credit where it's due because you did actually find this next study we're about to talk about.
I'm just the best co-host ever, or not.
Yep.
Terrible.
So this study was done by Vigna and colleagues, was published in 2019, and it does get kind of closer to the population that we actually care about. So they had 77 participants in the study. 62 were women, 15 were men, which I wanted to point out because that is a really interesting split. I feel like usually we see more men than women in studies. So I found it really fascinating that this study actually had more women than men. So that's good.
Thumbs up.
Not good. I mean, it would be better if it was split down the middle, but I liked
Yes,
to see it.
yes, that would have been better.
So the average age for these participants was around 53, and then all of them were recruited from an obesity clinic, which I do want to point out because that meant that every single participant in the study did have a BMI of 25 or above.
Yeah, and for our audience, BMI 25 to 30 is classified as overweight right now, and then 30 plus is considered as obese.
And that's like important to point out because we didn't have any what's considered healthy normal weight
Mhm.
BMIs. We can argue all day about the BMI not being a great scale, but for population based studies, it can be useful when we're trying to see like trends in some of these things.
Mhm.
But it also makes sense that they had people that were all 25 plus because they did recruit them from an obesity clinic. I'd be very concerned if someone with a normal BMI was coming to an obesity clinic.
Yeah.
But the critical point here is that they did also only include participants who already had measurable mood symptoms at baseline. So they already were experiencing symptoms of depression, anxiety, and they screened them all using validated clinical scales before they started.
So these are the people who are actually experiencing these symptoms, not just healthy volunteers then.
Yeah, exactly. And so I want to tell you the results first to this study, and then we're going to jump into the design limitation because I think that's a little bit of an easier way of presenting this study.
Okay, let's start it.
So they measured this study, they did an 8-week measure. So they
Mhm.
provided lion's mane supplementation to one of the groups in the study. And at the end of this 8 weeks, they did see that anxiety scores decreased by almost 50%. The depression scores decreased by about almost 35%. And sleep disorder scores also improved by about 34%. And then when they checked in again 8 weeks after participants had stopped taking the supplement, they found those improvements had held up. So that meant there was kind of no washout effect, that the benefits of taking that supplement had persisted.
Yeah, even though I read this research, like after seeing the numbers like before, because it's almost like very little impact. The 49% reduction seems a lot to me. It's not a small
Yeah.
number for sure. Yeah, for research
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah, no, it's not a small number at all. Those are clinically meaningful effect sizes. But the thing that makes it a little bit even more interesting, so since these were all people that were overweight or obese, they not only had half of them take the lion's mane, they also had every single one of them follow a low calorie diet, which I don't really want to spend too much time on because personally think it was a little too low of calories, but they did
Mhm.
have both of them follow this low calorie diet. And they found that the benefit, the mental health benefits, the reduction in anxiety and depression, only was present in the group that was consuming the lion's mane. And so
Mhm.
the other half that only had that low calorie diet didn't actually show any mood improvements. So you're able to kind of say that it wasn't the diet that was causing this benefit. It was likely the lion's mane.
Well, that sounds fantastic and very exciting. But I would be I would be curious to hear about some of the limitations too, because again, it's so good to be true.
Yes, and it is too good to be true because there's no placebo group in this
Oh
study.
God, I
So,
knew it.
yeah. So everyone in the study knew if they were taking lion's mane or not. So everyone was told you're taking follow this low calorie diet, and here you half of these people you go take these extra pills. So the lion's mane group knew that they were taking something that was supposed to be helping their mood. So
Mhm.
any mood outcomes that are being measured are you have to weigh that they could have potentially had that placebo effect happening as well.
Mhm. Yeah. So we can't really, separate that lion's mane effect from the placebo effect.
Yep, exactly, which is why it's so important that we do these placebo studies. And so the authors actually explicitly state this in their study as well. And they call it
Mhm.
a pilot study themselves as well. And they specifically say it needs to be followed up with more randomized placebo controlled trials, which, yes, it does. So I'm not undermining the findings necessarily by flagging that, but I do want to say that because they didn't have that placebo controlled aspect to it, we can't just say, oh, yeah, the lion's mane really, really helped this. And it wasn't the weight loss or wasn't the, diet because they had that control group because they didn't really truly have a true control group. They did not have a placebo group. But
Mhm.
the signal that kind of what they're finding was large enough that I do think it does warrant them to study this and potentially follow up with a randomized placebo controlled trial.
Yeah, well, it's definitely promising, it seems like even without placebo group, you still got like significant number, significantly higher
Hmm.
number with reduction in anxiety. So yeah, it sounds very promising. But
Hmm.
okay, how about you reminding me to bring something up about
Oh,
BDNF?
yes.
It's time to put that in our main course.
Yes, that I'm glad I told you to remind me there because it here's where it is. So this study was interesting because they also measured the BDNF levels in the participants in this study.
Mhm.
So they specifically were looking for what's called pro-BDNF. So that's a precursor form of BDNF
Yeah, yeah.
before it gets converted into the active form. So they after the 8 weeks of the lion's mane supplementation, they drew the blood of the participants in the group and they showed that the people who took lion's mane had a significant increase in the serum, so their blood levels of that pro BDNF, and the control group did not
Mhm.
have that.
So that's the same pathway that showed in the mouse study. So then.
Yeah, so that's the exact same pathway. So in that first mouse
Mhm.
study with Chong and his colleagues, we saw that lion's mane was likely activating that BDNF signaling cascade in the hippocampus of the mice brains. And here we're
Mhm.
seeing a measurable change in that precursor, the BDNF precursor level in the human blood. So it's not like perfect comparison. It is different tissues like blood versus brain. It's different species, mice versus humans, and they're kind of different measures of BDNF. Like we were measuring pro BDNF, not BDNF specifically, in this
Yeah.
study with the humans. But the same biological pathway keeps appearing across like these studies from the different groups. So I think that convergence shows like there's more evidence that that mechanism is possibly the mechanism for why lion's mane is working. It's not proof, but it is kind of showing that that is possibly the pathway worth studying more.
It's very interesting to see that all of them are, even though it's like the precursor of BDNF, you're still getting like precursor of the BDNF, right? So that's why
Yeah.
it's just both of the studies and the at the same time is kind of proving that maybe yeah, this is
Hmm.
something that we have to be looking through a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same underlying pathway through each of the studies.
Okay. But what is the real takeaway from all of these studies that we've covered so far?
So here's how I would frame it. So, Chong, with the first study with the mice, told us how lion's mane might work with that BDNF pathway. And then the next study with Doherty told us that something's likely showing up in healthy humans under really well controlled conditions. Very cautious because it was a trend. It wasn't statistically significant, but that trend was there. And then the last study with Vigna tells us that the signal in people with actual symptoms is large enough to take seriously, and that we would likely benefit from having some more placebo controlled replications before we can make any sort of recommendations at all for this.
So there are not like very strong evidence like smoking gun studies, but
Mm,
it's the three imperfect studies pointing in the same direction that it should also be researched a bit more.
yeah, which is honestly the most honest position to take about this. It's not a scam, but we also can't say that it definitely is working, but there could be something very real here that we just need to study more. We don't have
Mhm.
enough evidence to support a true clinical recommendation to take the supplement that it will do these things. And that's honestly how most science works in the early stages. We don't get one perfect study that just goes, hey, here's what works and this is awesome. We get a body of evidence that has to build and build and build over time with smaller studies with mice, with different animals, looking at the mechanisms, moving to human studies, moving to randomized controlled trials with lots of people having different variables. We need to eventually get to the point where we have research that involves people with depression, with anxiety,
Mhm.
with diagnoses to be before we're able to say like, yeah, this supplement is good for those people. And we don't have that yet.
For it to be, like, even clinically, being applicable, this study needs to give the same results in different continents, multiple times it needs to be done, so, yeah, like, I mean,
Mhm.
that's why you hear us dietitians always saying, like, "Maybe," and trying to be a little bit more balanced and don't say
Yep.
something crazy, over the top, claims about, like, "This is gonna get you this, and this is gonna do you that," kind of a thing, because it
Yep.
may not.
Exactly. That's kind of the most important thing we want you guys to take away from this today. But here is our main concerns and considerations we just want to lay out very explicitly for people when we're looking at this research. So, the
Okay.
first most important thing I think is that there is no established therapeutic dose for lion's mane. The
Mhm.
studies range. So, even in these studies, they ranged with the dosage. But in other studies we found too, the dosage ranges from like 500 milligrams a day to 3,000 milligrams per day. And that is such a wildly different like dosage amount to be able to like say, yeah, this dose is a good amount to take.
There's also this like fruiting body and mycelium that you've mentioned earlier too. So the
Hmm.
products that contain different compounds at different concentrations, that also is one of the things too, because most of the products that,
Hmm.
even the one that I bought for myself, it doesn't really specify which part of the mushroom is actually used. And then we've seen it in the
Yep.
studies that that actually makes a difference, especially for BDNF.
Yeah, exactly. And with lion's mane, typically we want a little bit more of that mycelium versus the fruiting body in the supplement,
Mhm.
anyways, which actually beneficially is more of the cheaper way to produce supplements. So, more than likely, a lot of the lion's mane supplements, even if they don't say, probably are more mycelium. But unlike, some other mushrooms where the fruiting body is going to be better. But yeah, well, we don't really know with the labels. And that kind of brings us on to the next point too, is that quality control with supplements.
Mhm.
There is no really any standardization with commercial products and supplements that we buy on the shelves. So when you're buying like a lion's mane, that could be completely different ranges of doses. We don't even know if they've been tested to indicate that you actually are getting lion's mane in your supplement. For all you
Mhm.
know, it could be lion's mane or it could be a mix of lion's mane and wood pulp. Like that's not,
Yeah.
they're not required to label that on the packaging. And because it's a dietary supplement, like I brought up very early on, it doesn't go through all the same rigorous testing that a pharmaceutical medication would go to before it hits the shelves.
But still, there are some tricks, especially with like the most recent protein recommendations. We've heard them a lot. Third party testing. you know?
Yes.
Because was it lead that they found in protein supplements?
I think so. Yeah,
That was
lead or
causing a bit of
arsenic
a
or something.
problem. Yeah, something like
Mhm.
that, and then one of the things that you should be looking for is 100% a party testing. Unfortunately, it is voluntary and most products don't have it at all.
Yeah, and then I think it makes it even harder too when you have companies that are labeling things as proprietary blends because that can also like really mask how much of the active compound is actually in the product. So it is interesting because a 2017 analysis of medicinal mushroom products did find
Mhm,
that many of them contained very little to no actual mushroom DNA or active compounds in them. So it's just something to read your label about to make sure like it's actually explicitly stating how much milligrams are in the product.
mhm,
Do they have third party testing to verify that you are actually getting what they're saying is in it, and
yeah,
you're not potentially poisoning yourself with other things? So that is something that is really important when we're looking at dietary supplements. And I do want to point out too, like just because something's natural does not automatically mean that it is safe or that it is
yes,
effective. And I think the important thing to remember too is that big pharma, quote unquote, the pharmaceutical industry and big wellness, big supplement, the wellness and supplement industry, they both want your money, right?
yeah,
They both are going to market things in a way that get you to want to take them. So
mhm,
whether that's through an ad online that says this medication can solve these problems, or the big wellness industry going, this is a natural way of solving all your problems, they're both just looking for your money. And so the most
mhm,
important thing is to take into consideration, is this safe? Does the research show it's safe? Does the research show it's effective? Does the research or testing of this product show I'm actually getting what I'm being told that I'm getting in this product?
yeah. I wish I could say ask your healthcare provider, but unfortunately, some healthcare providers have in their own practices, they're selling some supplements like this. So,
Mhm.
since there's no regulation,
Mhm.
but one of the things that came to my mind when I think about like what could be the potential like negative impact of a mushroom, I thought about
Mhm.
allergies right away. I'm like,
Yeah.
what if I have allergy and I have no idea? Because lion's mane is not something very common. And then we cannot just
Mhm.
go ahead and find them in shelves all the time. We don't grow up with them and there's no education
Mhm.
on it. So it's just this magical thing that is presented to us, and we don't even know how our body is going to react to that food or the protein in that
Mhm.
food to begin with.
Mhm. Well, and that's a great point too, because not all mushrooms are the same either. So you could
Mhm.
potentially eat like a mushroom at the store, like a portobello mushroom, and be fine and not have an allergic reaction, but then actually be allergic to lion's mane because it's a completely different type of mushroom. And so
Yeah.
that's something to be very wary about, right? It's really rare in the research that we've seen. People have a reaction to these, but it could
Mhm.
happen. Like it's not
Yeah.
never, like it happens. And kind of along the same lines too is medication interactions. So a lot
Yes.
of times we think natural supplements or natural things are safe. It doesn't automatically mean that it's safe. When you have a natural compound that maybe in the research has shown it can actually be effective for things, that means then that it could potentially interact with other compounds that also affect those same pathways. So if you
Mm.
have, say, lion's mane, right, and we know maybe through this research it's starting to show it actually has an impact on the brain and the neurons, right? That means that it could potentially interact with other medications that also
Mhm.
affect the brain and the neurons. So
Yeah.
we don't have any research to that has studied the medication interactions because it hasn't gone through all the rigorous stuff that a medication has. So we don't really know. This is kind of a wild, wild west with this supplement of we don't know what interactions it does have, but we can kind
Mhm.
of guess because of some of the research showing that it has potentially some effects on these areas of the brain that it likely could have interactions with some of these other medications.
Yeah, I really wanna, like, make a comment about, like, the immunosuppressant, things too, because people go through really, really hard times, right? Like, when they have cancer
Mhm.
too, and these products are pretty much, like, suggesting you it's nature's way, everything is natural, like, ditch coffee, ditch everything that's bad for you, and then get these, like,
Mhm.
good things for yourself, and that's how they promote it too. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I think they're targeting those groups too with these sort of claims, not just, healthy individuals, but someone who might be going through cancer treatment and might have depression along with it because it is very common. And that person might feel like, oh, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to take this medication, but it may interact with their immunosuppressants.
That reminds me of our last episode we did where you were
Mhm.
talking about the fear-based messaging of things as well. When we have people that
Yeah.
are already afraid, like, "Oh, I have this disease state and I'm really worried. Like, I was diagnosed with cancer, right? And I'm really worried. Am I going to live? Am I going to survive? What's the side effects of going through a normal treatment?" They're going to be much more susceptible to big wellness, big supplement
Yeah.
claims of do it the natural way, right?
I mean, like, here's the thing though, like, what makes those groups even more vulnerable is, again, I am just trying to like kind of give a little bit of a caution to kind of like lay out what the picture is what makes them even more vulnerable is they take really, really hard, heavy medications. So,
Mhm.
the supplement world is almost like come in as like some form of an alternative to your medication in some situations, right? And then it may kind of like interact like that too, like when you're trying to take, because you're already feeling very drained from all the medications that you take. The medications that you take doesn't make you feel
Yeah.
good, makes you bad, makes you
Mhm.
feel bad. Like it's the opposite. So, yeah,
Mhm.
unfortunately, these products, more specifically these products, just becomes more appealing to these like
Yeah.
vulnerable groups. Yeah.
Definitely. And I wanna say here too, like, we're not trying to make this episode to say, like, don't take lion's mane or don't take supplements or
Yeah.
natural compounds or whatever. It's just more about we need to make sure that what we're taking is gonna be safe and that it's gonna be effective and not be making things worse. And so that's where we wanna make sure we're looking at the research. And that
Mhm.
there is a big risk if we're replacing or avoiding evidence-based treatments that have gone through very rigorous testing, like pharmaceutical medications in favor of a supplement that hasn't necessarily been fully tested yet. And that could be a very real clinical risk with doing that. Because again, like I said, natural does not automatically mean it's effective. It does not automatically mean it's safe. We need to make sure we're having rigorous testing to show that it is effective before we just completely stop taking a treatment that maybe is
Mhm.
already working well for us and just abandon ship and jump right into a supplement.
Yeah. I don't know if you've mentioned about this, but I just wanted to say, like, people with ADHD, anxiety, and depression, they also can be a target for these like marketing
Mhm.
things too. I don't want to just keep like bringing back to like, oh, this is too bad. Don't buy it for yourself. Like, how like our approach is pretty similar. If you have the money and if it's not gonna affect you in a negative way, go buy it. If it's gonna make you feel good, in the worst case scenario, you're gonna benefit from the placebo effect. You're gonna think
Mhm.
that you're gonna feel
That's
better.
true.
But,
Yeah.
problem begins when you are trying to use them as like a treatment, I guess. That's what we're
Mhm.
trying to kinda like lay out.
Caution. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
But let's bring this all home and wrap this all up because this is becoming a pretty long episode. But lion's mane is genuinely interesting. It has pretty early science that could potentially be promising. There's plausible
Mhm.
mechanisms, promising signs that maybe we need to move to larger trials, but there is nowhere near enough evidence to call it a mental health treatment. Significant supplement quality concerns do exist, including having no
Mhm.
established therapeutic doses, no regulatory oversight of dietary supplement products, and there is a clear difference between fruiting body and mycelium products that most labels don't even clarify. So, real
Mhm.
considerations that we do need to take into account involve medication interactions, safety in specific populations, the risk of using supplements as a replacement, and then potential allergies.
That's the full picture, and there are actually, like, more things needs to be figured out, like, with the supplementation dose, with, who should be taking, and what medications that might be actually interacting to, and what conditions might be affected, like, negatively from this. There definitely needs to be further research for this.
And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that we shouldn't be interested in it because I'm very interested in mushrooms. Personally, I think they're very fascinating. And
Yeah.
I think this is something worth studying. But right now, maybe it's not necessarily something that we just dive in right away and accept as, oh, this is a
Mhm.
automatically brain boosting thing. Scientists are interested in it, though. It is worth investigating, but it's not proven. If you want to eat it as a food, great, by all means.
Right.
It does taste delicious. It makes great crab cakes. But if you're considering it
Yeah.
as a supplement, we do recommend looking for third party testing to make sure you're getting what you are promised, that you start with a lower reasonable dose just to make sure you don't have any allergic reactions, and then make sure you're talking to your doctor, especially if you're already on other prescription medications. We want to make sure that you're not going to be having any medication interactions for things. But overall, in general, thank you, everybody, for spending time with us today. I know this was a very research heavy episode, but I think it needed to be. So,
Let us know in the comments if you would be interested in us, covering other adaptogenics or new nootropics. No, nootropics. Is that what it was?
nootropics. Yep,
Nootropics. And yeah, we would love to talk about them. I mean, Rachel does love doing research. And so do I
we
now.
love
I can
research.
do I can do, can do some research too.
Yes. And as always, the studies and all of the links are going to be listed in the show notes below. So if you're interested in reading, check those out. Share this podcast episode with anyone who is interested in lion's mane or maybe has been eyeing that lion's mane coffee on the grocery store. They do deserve to hear the full story. But we will see you all in 2 weeks. So,
Bye bye.
bye.